Hello, everybody. Welcome. We have Noir, and I always forget how to say this because it's French. Noirangetrois.
Noirangetrois.
Thank you. Also known as Noir. So Noir first got back into Gundam Wing when it was aired in Toonami in the States back in 2000. It played a very formative part of her teen years and was her gateway to fandom. She started writing fics even back then and has returned to the fandom on and off over the years, although she's consistently been involved for the last 6 years, which is absolutely wild. So she's coming today to talk about Lady Un, and we welcome her and thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today.
Yeah, I'm excited.
You are now the host.
Okay. Does this look like a slideshow?
It absolutely does.
Excellent. So today I'm going to be talking about Lady Un and specifically the way they portray her having essentially what is a diagnosable mental illness, dissociative identity disorder. Now, dissociative identity disorder is the current term for what used to be known as multiple personality disorder. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, most recent version being 5TR, no idea what TR stands for. Definition is a mental disorder characterized by the presence of at least two distinct and separate personalities within an individual. It can be more than two, but in Lady Un's case, it is only two. Common features of DID. It is a trauma response. It's usually in response to childhood trauma. The different personalities are known as alters. These have different personality traits, sometimes different worldviews, and changing from one alter to another is also known as switching. So specifically as to the trauma response, 90% of cases, there is a history of abuse in childhood. Aside from that, war and other childhood traumas can also cause it. Much less commonly, it can be caused by more mild events such as stress. So the primary identity, I like to call her militaristic Un. It's the one we meet first. She is a ruthless military strategist. She wears a military uniform as well as glasses. Her hair is severely pulled back in buns, and she has a deeper, harsher voice than her other persona, her alter. Examples of her ruthlessness. In episode 5, after she assassinates Darlin, Foreign Minister Darlin, Vice Foreign Minister Darlin, I should say, she orders her subordinates to kill Relina, 15-year-old girl, if she resists capture. Rebels save her. So in the next episode, Un orders an attack on Relina's school. One soldier explicitly states, "I don't feel great about this, attacking a defenseless civil facility," to which she replies, "Then stay behind. Someone else can lead." Therese eventually calls off the attack as a favor to Zex, but nonetheless, she sends mobile suits to a school. Of course, there's also episode 10, which this screenshot is pulled from, when she tries to order a missile attack on a random colony if the Gundams don't surrender. So, journey to DID. The first two screenshots here are both from episode 10. First one is when she is ordering the missile launch. Specifically, she says, launch a missile, I don't care where. She doesn't care. She just wants this act of aggression to further her goals. Now, at the end of the episode, Noin goes up to her to deliver a message from Treize. And initially, Un goes to hit her. And the hand you see in this shot is Noin blocking that hit. And the message Noin relays is, Colonel, he says for you to be more graceful about everything. More graceful, Lady Un. And they actually use all caps for lady in the subtitles. This is the only time Noin calls her Lady Un as opposed to Colonel Un. The next episode, episode 11, is where the last screenshot is from. And I'm going to share the dialogue from this scene, or at least an abridged version of the dialogue. Un, right before this, bows to Treize and says, Your Excellency, I shouldn't have acted on my own to plan a direct attack on the colonies. Treize says, That's water under the bridge now. I'd prefer to keep the enemy from becoming more powerful. Can I rely on you, Lady Un? Un says, Yes, I'll eliminate them at once. And then Treize takes Un's hand, as in the screenshot. Your Excellency? Clearly confused, Treize says, the peace-minded people of the colonies won't stand any militarism. You can do away with some of your formalities. He then goes on to instruct her to announce her trip to space, which she does later. So basically, she tries to attack the colonies, gets rebuked by Treize via Noin, and then Treize goes on to say it's water under the bridge, but tells her to be more, to get rid of some of her formalities. That's it. After episode 11, we don't see her again until episode 17, and we see her in her altar, Peaceful Un. This version of Un is a hopeful idealist. She wears a skirt suit and no glasses. Her hair is worn loose, and her voice is higher pitched and gentler in nature. At the beginning, once we first see this persona, it's easy to assume that this is all a facade to fool the leadership of the colonies. But it becomes clear over time that this is not the case, and I'll discuss that soon. So the reason behind developing this altar, the implication, given all that happens between Un and Treize and what has been shown so far, is that the stress of being reprimanded by Treize, a person she is obviously devoted to, is enough to cause her to develop a more graceful and peace-minded altar. This is pretty dubious because the vast majority of DID cases are caused by some sort of trauma. What cases aren't related to childhood abuse can be caused by other traumatic events, as I mentioned, natural disasters and military combat. And while Un has seen combat, it had not previously been indicated that this had caused her personality to split, and she does not go into combat immediately preceding her development of an altar. She's in a command position. Further, the fact that her altar adheres to the mannerisms and mindset Treize instructed her to adopt heavily suggests that his words are the cause of this change. It should be noted, however, that some sources say that while not common, as I mentioned before, stress alone can cause DID.
Noir?
The website of the Cleveland Clinic says that episodes of DID can be triggered by symbolic traumas, including mild events such as stress. It could certainly be argued that being reprimanded by someone Un is so doggedly devoted to serving would be stressful. But whether that stress would be sufficient to trigger DID is definitely up for debate.
Hey,
So,
Noir.
yes.
I think there's somebody trying to get into the presentation. Would you be able to let them in?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay. I did not see that. Thank you for letting me know.
No problem.
Okay, so an example of peaceful Un, episode 19. When Wu Fei is attacking Space Fortress Barge, Un opposes the fighting completely. As you can see from some of the subtitles here, please stop this futile battle. Let us greet a new age together. Let's do away with any desires to battle, which were left over from the passing era. Such destructive desires aren't needed in the future. After this little speech, Nicole begs Lieutenant Nicole, her second-hand man in space, Nicole begs Un to give him orders to attack Wu Fei's Gundam, but Un responds that she can't do that. Peace should prevail in outer space. This prompts Nicole to wonder, which colonel am I supposed to follow? So we have people acknowledging that she is not this is not the same person. This isn't just some sort of trick to try to fool the representatives of the colonies. So one thing that is characteristic of DID is compartmentalization. That is, one alter may or frequently does not remember what happens when another alter is in charge. And that does seem to be the case with Un. So, for example, this is from episode 19. Peaceful Un happens to be talking to some colony representatives about Oz's past mistakes when Nicole comes to give her a report. He tells her, "We have the item in question," referring to a shuttle one of the Gundam pilots used to launch into space, and she has no idea what he's talking about. He then asks her to return to Barge, and all she can do is ask, "Barge?" She has no idea what he's talking about. He insists that it's on Trace's orders, which she repeats to herself, and then the screen becomes black and white, as you can see here. As far as I can tell, and I tried to look through as much of the show as possible when I was preparing this, this is the only time the creators use black and white. Literally the only time. Un's confusion is plain. You can see her eyes widen here, but then her eyes and voice change back to that of her military persona. You can see in this last screenshot, her eyebrows are turned. She's now, instead of having an open aspect to her face, she's, brow furrowed and ready to get down to business. The color returns and she returns to Barge. Another example of compartmentalization is in episode 20. Troa is essentially trying out to be an Oz soldier at this point. He's being interviewed by Peaceful Un. He says at one point, "I'm impressed how Oz is gradually taking over space while appearing to act out of friendship. People may think of it as foul play, but it suits me." And when Un questions that, he says, "Oz is a place where the crafty are acknowledged. That's what it's about." After he says that, Un literally begins to shake and deny what Troa is saying. That's what's happening in this screenshot. Lieutenant Nicole then tells Troa that after she's escorted away by several soldiers, that Lady Un is a much stronger person in her uniform. She might feel like killing someone as questionable as you. So again, characters acknowledging that Lady Un has two personas. She has an alter. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that one of the characteristics of DID is switching, that is, changing from one alter to another. And they do actually depict that as well. More, this process can take seconds to minutes to days, when what we see is between seconds to minutes, depending on the scene. We see Un switch from peaceful to military personas several times, including what we just talked about, but also this one. This scene begins by showing Un in her suit with her hair down and no glasses, but then continues on to show maids helping her take off her suit jacket, place on her uniform jacket, and do her hair. She completes the process herself by putting on her glasses. And in this scene, as well as others, the transformation begins with her as a passive receiver of change before she uses her own agency to add the final touch by putting on her glasses. The only time we see Un change from her military persona into her peaceful one is in episode 23, and I don't have screenshots of that. But what happens is she's speaking with Troa about how Zex's ideals or ideas about peace and space might be different from Milliardo's. She insists that they and Zex will battle again. She then admits that even Treize cannot, quote, stop the future, but I'll try to direct things towards Treize's ideal. At this point, she takes off her glasses, once again taking an active role in the change. After her next line, her voice becomes higher pitched and she ends with, I'll fight and win for Treize's future and for my own future. So, these are all things that the show does reasonably well. The problem, or at least the least believable part of DID for Un, is the process of reintegration. That is the different alters, personas integrating into one. In episode 25, Tubra, after she releases the Gundam pilots and the scientists on the moon base, Tubrov shoots her through the chest after she releases them, and she falls face forward onto the floor, apparently dead. Though in episode 42, we discover she is alive and see by episode 48 that her alter has been integrated. The problem here is the impetus for the integration. It's true that DID can resolve without treatment, but that is really uncommon. And in Un's case, the transformative moment depicted is the moment she is shot. In between the gun being fired and the bullet hitting her, Un has a thought process. She responds to Tubra's accusation that she was too lenient by saying to herself, as a soldier, yes, but as a civilian, I lived a strict life. At the time, she's wearing her uniform with her hair up and glasses on. Her reference to her civilian life could certainly mean that she's referring to her time as peaceful Un, suggesting that the amnesia she previously experienced between her two identities is no longer present. Narratively, that might be the creator's intent. By this time, peaceful Un has come to see battle as sometimes necessary to attain peace, rather than something to avoid at all costs. That might be considered a step toward uniting her two identities. However, given that DID is a disorder typically caused by trauma, it's a hard sell that a traumatic incident like being shot, followed by a coma, could somehow cause the reintegration of her multiple identities. So, in summary, at the end, episode 48, after Wu Fei kills Treize, Un is shown in the control room of the MO2 resource satellite. She is wearing her military uniform, but her hair is down and her glasses are off. Her voice is deeper pitched than that of peaceful Un, but much calmer and softer than that of military Un. It is essentially a blend of the two personas, just as her outward appearance combines her military uniform and the hairstyle and lack of glasses typical of her peaceful identity. What's the takeaway? Of all the characters the creators chose to give DID to, they chose a villain. This is true of most media portrayals in which people have violent alters that do terrible things. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is probably the best known, but the M. Night Shyamalan movie Split is also a good example of this. With Un, the good news is the alter is actually the good guy. That's different than usual. She starts as a villain. DID brings her essentially into being a positive character. That being said, even if it's an improvement on the trope, she's still an antagonist during the time that she has DID, which means the audience will associate the disorder with villainy, and that's a problem. So, Gundam Wing's portrayal overall of DID is a mixed bag. It does a good job of showcasing the reality of what some people with DID experience, such as alters having different appearances, voices, and worldviews, alters not remembering each other's actions, and the process of switching. However, the cause of Un's DID is far from typical, her recovery is highly questionable, and the fact that she is a villain is highly problematic. It is perhaps better than many media portrayals of DID, but it is far from perfect. And these are the sources I used to develop my original essay and also this presentation. That's the presentation, so I'm happy to take questions now.
Thank you so much. That was, honestly, I didn't see her in such a light until now, and especially what you were talking about, where the alter is the good guy, basically. Can you talk a little bit about how, because I think looking at it too, sorry, my cat is, of course, being obnoxious right now. How her alter is also more feminine, whereas the primary is more masculine. What are some of your thoughts about that?
I hadn't really delved into that in the essay, and I hadn't really thought about it a lot, but I think that is probably something that goes hand in hand with associating the military and violence with men versus being a civilian, being against violence as being feminine. And just that cultural assumption is where I would go with that. And it's interesting to point that out because there's also the dichotomy bad guy, good guy, where the bad guy is masculine and the good guy is feminine in this context, which is very frequently not the case. So thank you. That's a very interesting question. And if anyone else has other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
I know, unfortunately, it dropped on Danny, and unfortunately, she said she's going to DM you some of her questions.
Okay.
But also, if Onyx, if you wanted to ask anything, or if you wanted to put in the chat anything.
Sure. I'm very curious, coming at this from a complete outsider standpoint, because this is obviously not my fandom by default. but I'm really curious as to, when they have that sort of resolution of the DID, where you have that, like the one that you called Un 2.0, kind of in which ways are those incorporated in terms of her, both the facets of her personality in each of her alters, as well as kind of what happens in terms of her memory. um and I think, Nora, you're familiar with why I'm asking this. But yeah, I'm just really curious as to what they did with it.
Okay, so I got a little distracted letting people back into, or letting people in. Sato and Diane were both waiting as well. So I apologize to both of you that I didn't see you while I was still making the presentation. So can you reiterate that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So, I was kind of curious because I'm coming at this from an outsider perspective in terms of not having much familiarity with the fandom, of what did they decide in terms of how they resolved her character, her alters, at the end, right? In terms of how much does she retain in terms of facets of her personality or her memories or things like that? Because, from personal experience, whatever, there are some of those things that you keep and some that don't if things happen to resolve. So I'm just very curious as to how the um, showmakers tackled that kind of thing.
Right. Well, there's not a lot of material to go off of. Episode 48, where we finally see her as definitely integrated, is the second to last episode, and she's not the focus of the final episode. Then we have the OAV, in which she is the leader of the Preventers, the governmental peacekeeping organization. As far as I can recall, and I didn't spend time analyzing Endless Waltz, the OAV, she has memory of everything.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's not
And
great.
maybe that's fanon that I've absorbed over time. I'm not
Ooh,
sure. But again, there's not a ton to go on because it's right at the end.
makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Hmm?
Do you think in the Endless Waltz that, because it seems like she's more of her own character, and not one that's, Oz or associated with Trays or associated with this or that, like she's come to peace. Do you think that um maybe her alter and her primary have somehow communicated these memories, or somehow, like, I don't know, I guess found an understanding between them?
I suppose so. Um, as someone who doesn't have DID, I can't attest to exactly how it feels if and when someone has those alters integrated. Um, but like I said, as far as I can tell, she recalls it. And um, now I want to watch Endless Waltz again to
I mean,
see,
I'm not
look for
opposed to that.
clues about or at least the parts that showcase her, to look for clues on that, because I'm not sure.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciated too when you were talking about the preparation of her switching between the two, about how, it's, in one aspect, it's, a sudden change, that she goes from peaceful Lady Un to militaristic Un. But then there's also a part where it's a process of
Mhm.
putting on the outfit, putting on, the hair, and doing all of that. I never thought of it that way before, and I really appreciated you going into that. It's not really so much of a question as that's something that I hadn't really pieced together. I guess a question that I would have is, do you think Trey's knew what that she had DID, and what do you think,
Yes.
and his
Yes.
actions with her? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. I have notes on this. I'm trying to go okay, so Trey's definitely knows that she has DID, because at one point, I'm trying to find which episode it's in, he's talking to Zex and is asking Zex to help, for him to help take care of her or protect her. Okay, here it is. Episode 22. Tallgeese is defending an Alliance colony from mobile dolls. Barge's beam cannon is aimed at them. Let's see. Zex's the Tallgeese detects a Taurus floating along, not defending itself. Un is inside with her hair down. And Un says, Trey's is hoping we'll put up a fight. Can't you create a new future, Trey's? There's no choice left but to battle. It's the only way that remains. Without fighting, nothing can be created. So this is the point where her peaceful persona realizes that maybe battle is appropriate sometimes. At this point, Trey's appears on Zex's screen in the Tallgeese and says that he doesn't have much power within Romefeller at that point. And then, Milliardo, there's one person who understands me. Her feelings toward me have given her split personalities. Straight up says it. Zex says, Lady Un, in acknowledgement. Trey's responds, I'm making the person closest to me feel insecure. I've got no right to talk about the future. I implore you, Milliardo, please save her. And he does. Later that
Okay,
episode.
one last question.
Sure.
This is so fascinating. Because now that I'm looking at it, it seems too like the peaceful Lady On, I don't know, she isn't as devoted to Trey's. She's more devoted to peace.
No, she's very devoted to Trey's.
Okay, so both of them, both personalities are devoted to Trey's.
Very much so.
Interesting.
Noir, what is your interpretation or reasoning behind why why unsplit into two personalities because of her feelings for Trey's?
Yes. So I can go ahead and summarize it. Sorry I didn't see you to let you in while the presentation was still going. Basically what happens is episode 10, when she's threatening to launch a missile on the colonies to make the Gundam surrender, Hiro self-destructs, etc. At the end of that, in the command center, Noin takes a call from Trey's in which she relays a reprimand of Trey's, saying that she needs to be more graceful. It's emphasized twice. In the next episode, Un is with Trey's in person and apologizing for what she did. And he says, that's water under the bridge. But then goes on to say that she should go to the colonies and that the peace-minded people of the colonies won't stand any militarism. You can do away with some of your formalities. That's all we get until she shows up 6 episodes later with her peaceful persona. So as far as we know, the stress of being reprimanded by Trey's is what causes it.
Can I chime in with a follow-up question of sorts?
Sure.
A lot of times, from what I have read about DID and the very few people I've interacted with who've experienced some aspect of it. Part of the barrier to, especially to reintegration, but also part of, the formation of those altars is because there's something within that altar that the primary altar, the one that's around more often, or the one that was around before, um is rejecting as a part of themselves. It's something that they want to be distanced from. So do you think that this speaks to Lady Un's rejection of being peaceful, or some sort of implication of that initially?
Absolutely. I definitely agree that that is the case. Um, it's Lady Un is not in the manga episode 0 that provides a lot of background for several of the characters, nor do I think she gets more background given to her in the We Don't Speak About It Frozen Teardrop.
She
But
does actually.
oh, she does. Can you share
Yeah.
about that?
What little I know of it is she actually was originally a subordinate of Septum's.
Oh, that makes
Yeah.
it interesting that she gets to shoot him.
Yeah, so a lot of her training wasn't necessarily just with the specials, but it was under Septum directly, and we kind of get an
In the
idea of what.
Alliance.
Yeah, so we kind of get an idea of what he's like and how he thinks.
Okay. And Onyx Septum is the worst voice actor of the dub.
Agreed.
Super obnoxious. And he's basically like an old fuddy-duddy military higher up. Is his depiction, and he's used by Treize and Un as part of the military coup.
But you kind of
What's that?
sorry. You kind of get the vibe from how he's talking about the colonies during the peace talks and a little bit before that. Oh, we should just crush them. We should just crush them. We have the military, right? We're the ones in power. We shouldn't have to bow to them.
Which is very close to Un's viewpoint early on.
Right.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. I love knowing that. But in the Gundam Wing universe, people join the military at like 12, some odd. So, she's been trained as a soldier since like before she possibly even hit puberty. So as part of trying to reconcile her life, I imagine she did have to completely reject the idea of being peaceful, and having someone pressure her into being that way would be the impetus to developing the altar. So very long, meandering way to answer your question, Onyx.
No, I love that. Thank you.
So if going back to your answer for me, so you're saying she develops these two personalities within the run of the actual showtime, because I was always under the impression she was like that before the show started.
She's not. She's only military
yeah. No,
up
yeah, you're right.
until episode 17, when we see the first example of peaceful.
Yeah, like that actually makes so much sense. I just, for whatever reason, I just thought that was the way she always was, or at least for a while. But like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense that her more peaceful side actually pops up for the first time within the show. So that actually it kind of, I don't know, it changes things for me about her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would definitely change the understanding of her character, generally speaking.
Yeah, for sure. Did you I'm so sorry I was late. Did you talk about how with her duality, it's also when she's when she's Colonel Un, she's coded as very masculine, and when she's peaceful Un, she's not. She's more feminine.
So I think that might have been a question I answered before you were in, because Box had asked about that. And so I hadn't actually really thought about it before Box asked that question. And my thought in the moment just now is, well, in general culture, being violent and, you know, ruthless is considered a masculine trait, as opposed to being passive and peaceful is more associated with femininity on average. So I assume that's why they went with those portrayals.
Do you think it might have been a possibility too, with, as you had mentioned before, with Noin saying very, very clearly Lady Un instead of Colonel Un, that might have been also the maybe part of the altar was trying to create a form that was more feminine and appeasing to Treize.
That is very possible, and it's important to note that her subordinates consistently call her Colonel Un almost all the time. Treize never calls her Colonel Un, always Lady Un, even in the presence of other military people.
Though I had never noticed that before, but that's so telling.
Yeah,
like, what do you think that says about his feelings towards her, that he calls her lady?
I feel like to a degree it's disrespectful, because it's eschewing the fact that she has this military rank that she's earned. I don't know. I think Treize is a misogynistic douchebag, so to be fair. So I'm not particularly charitable in my thoughts toward him. So I think it's just him being Treize, in that, he wants to. I think it's because he's very romantic in the way he sees the world, which makes me feel nauseous. But he is, in a weird way, quite a romantic, and I feel like that is probably part of why he calls her Lady Un.
Sato, did you have something to say about that? I saw your thing go off.
I just kind of a thought that I think it is a little bit of both. I think it is a little bit both Treize showing affection towards Un. Like, technically speaking, her name isn't Lady Un. Her name is Cordelia Fitzgerald.
A la Frozen Teardrop, right?
Yeah. Listen, I don't care for most of the story, but it is good for pulling out some of the background stuff that Shimizawa wanted to put into the show but couldn't.
Okay.
She gets the name Lady Un from Treize.
Oh.
Thank you, Sato.
So the fact that he refers to her as that is, I think, a little bit. I think it's twofold. I think it is him being disrespectful, but not necessarily to her in particular. More to, I guess, kind of an in-joke for him for middle fingering Romefeller and the Alliance.
Yeah.
And him displaying affection for her. Because to from his perspective, he might view it as his nickname for her.
I agree on that point. And he does care about her. Definitely. He definitely portrays that.
And I think a lot of the specials follow Trey's. So the specials referring to her as Un and not as Cordelia. Or I don't know exactly how she became Lady and Colonel Un. All I know is that the name came from Trey's. I'd have to dig through Frozen Teardrop at some point to get the full story on that. Yeah, thanks for that. But like I said, I think go ahead.
Sorry, go on. No. You finish, please.
No, it's just more reiterating the point that I think it is just him giving the middle fingers in a subtle way to the status quo of the Alliance and Romefeller. Because if you look at most of the folks in Romefeller and the Alliance, it is predominantly male.
Yes.
It is predominantly dudes.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say, because we have the examples of essentially Noin and Dorothy, that women can be very militaristic if they want to be.
Right.
And I think, like I said, is a little bit of a middle finger because he's not referring to her by the rank that they gave her, but he is also reminding them she is a lady. She is a woman. Even if she doesn't necessarily always acknowledge the fact that she is a woman and a lady and may not see herself that. Again, she spends most of her time under somebody who's kind of a dickhead.
Just a bit.
Truth. Thank you, Sato. Diane, did you have another question? We should probably wrap this up soon.
Going back to her name, like actually just for anybody who knows or what you guys how you guys write her, like post EW and whatnot. What do you have people, do we know her name or what she goes by after, during Endless Waltz or after Endless Waltz? Is it still Colonel Un or is it Commander Un?
It might be Commander Un.
I think
I like Commander. Commander sounds so cool.
I think if I remember Endless Waltz right, she still goes by Un. But I think it is Commander.
It might also be Director.
Or Director Un.
Yeah, I think it might be Director Un.
I know that's what's most commonly used in fanfic for Preventers. Director Un.
Director Un. Okay. Because that's what you would call the head of, like, say, I don't know, the FBI director or something. It'd be interesting to look into that. But that was just my question. Like, what do we call her after Endless Waltz? And she's no longer Colonel. She's no longer
part of a military structure, but instead of peacekeeping organization.
Exactly. So,
which
we call her badass.
Yeah.
All right. I think we should
call her boss lady.
Right. Exactly. All right. Is there anything else that's pressing, or may we adjourn? All right. Thank you so much, Noir. This was really eye-opening. I haven't really written a lot on Lady Un, but I think I might in the future because she's a very fascinating character.
I am excited to read anything you write because I love her. She is a complicated character. Obviously, some issues with the way they portrayed her DID, but at the end of the day, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, she has a very, she really has an amazing arc, and especially in Endless Waltz, that really should be written a lot more because I feel like there's so much you could dive into there.
Yeah. Well, also, I just want to thank all of y'all for coming to hear this, and hopefully, since some of you weren't able to get in until after I finished speaking, you'll be able to see the video soon.
Yeah, so it'll be posted on the on the YouTube and also on the server that we have. And thank you everybody for coming and for your questions. And thank you so much, Noor.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can end it, Noor, since you're the boss and the host. And
Sure.
thanks so much.